Captain Marcus Thornfield stood at attention in the grand throne room, his polished armor reflecting the morning sunlight that streamed through the tall stained glass windows. 23 years of loyal service to the crown had taught him to read the subtle signs of trouble brewing in the palace. Today, those signs were everywhere. The young King Edmund sat rigidly on his golden throne, his face pale and drawn. At only 19, he had inherited more than just a crown 6 months ago. He had inherited a kingdom on the edge of civil unrest. The recent drought had destroyed crops across the northern provinces, leaving thousands of families hungry and desperate. Refugees had begun streaming toward the capital, seeking help that the royal treasury could barely provide. Captain Thornfield, the king's voice echoed in the vast chamber. I have received disturbing reports from our spies in the northern territories. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his heart began to beat faster. As the head of the Royal Guard's intelligence division, he knew exactly which reports the king meant. 3 days ago, his most trusted scout had returned with news that would change everything. Your Majesty, Marcus replied with a slight bow of his head. King Edmund gestured to his chief advisor, Lord Chancellor Aldrich Blackwood, who stepped forward holding a sealed document. Blackwood was a thin man in his 50s, with calculating gray eyes and a reputation for ruthless political maneuvering. Marcus had never trusted him, and recent events had only deepened his suspicions. The Northern Lords are gathering their forces, Blackwood announced, his voice carrying across the silent throne room. Our sources confirm that Duke Roderick of Northmere has been secretly meeting with other nobles. They claim to be organizing relief efforts for the drought victims, but we have evidence of weapon stockpiling and military preparations. Marcus remained silent, but his jaw tightened. He knew Duke Roderick personally. They had served together in the border wars 15 years ago. The Duke was an honorable man who genuinely cared for his people. If he was gathering forces, it wasn't for rebellion. It was because the people were suffering and the crown wasn't helping. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, unrolling the document. We have intercepted correspondence suggesting they plan to march on the capital within the month. They intend to force the king to abdicate in favor of Duke Roderick's claim to the throne. This was news to Marcus, and he struggled to keep his face impassive. His own intelligence network had found no evidence of any plot against the king. Duke Roderick's claim to the throne was legitimate. He was King Edmund's cousin and had been considered for succession before Edmund's father had chosen his son. But Roderick had accepted that decision gracefully and had never shown any ambition for power. King Edmund leaned forward on his throne, his young face creased with worry. Captain Thornfield, what are your recommendations? Before Marcus could answer, Blackwood spoke again. Your Majesty, there is only one course of action that will preserve your crown and prevent a costly civil war. We must strike first. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus felt his blood turn cold as he realized what the Chancellor was suggesting. Explain, King Edmund said quietly. Blackwood's thin lips curved into what might have been called a smile. Duke Roderick and his supporters will gather for the Harvest Festival in 3 days' time. It's an annual celebration held at Northmere Castle, supposedly to pray for better crops next year. All the northern lords and their families will be present. Women, children, elderly relatives. They will be completely unguarded, expecting only festivities. Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to remain still. We send the Royal Guard under Captain Thornfield's command, Blackwood continued. They arrive at dawn on the festival day, surround the castle, and arrest Duke Roderick and all his conspirators for high treason. Any who resist are to be killed immediately. This will end the threat before it can grow. The throne room fell into absolute silence. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. In all his years of service, he had fought honorable battles against foreign enemies, protected the royal family from assassins, and maintained order in the kingdom. But this was something entirely different. Captain, King Edmund's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you think of this plan? Marcus looked into the young king's eyes and saw fear, confusion, and desperate hope that someone would tell him what to do. Edmund was barely out of boyhood, thrust into impossible circumstances with advisors who seemed more interested in maintaining their own power than truly serving the crown. Your Majesty, Marcus began carefully, may I ask to see the evidence of this supposed conspiracy? Blackwood's eyes narrowed dangerously. Captain, are you questioning the reliability of our intelligence services? I am questioning the wisdom of attacking innocent families at a religious festival based on unverified reports, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. The Chancellor's face flushed red. Innocent. Duke Roderick is gathering an army to overthrow the rightful king. His innocent family members are part of a treasonous plot. Where is this army? Marcus asked. My own scouts report no unusual military activity in the northern provinces. The only gathering is of refugees seeking food and shelter. King Edmund looked back and forth between his captain and his chancellor, clearly torn. Lord Blackwood, show Captain Thornfield the evidence. Blackwood hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Marcus to notice. Your Majesty, intelligence matters are highly sensitive. The fewer people who know our sources, the safer those sources remain. It was a reasonable explanation, but Marcus's instincts screamed that something was wrong. In 23 years of service, he had never been denied access to intelligence that affected military operations under his command. Your Majesty, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully, if I am to lead the Royal Guard into what could become a battle, I need to understand the full scope of the threat we're facing. Without proper intelligence, I cannot guarantee the safety of our men or the success of the mission. King Edmund nodded slowly. Lord Blackwood, please share what we know with Captain Thornfield. He has earned the right to see any evidence that concerns his duties. The Chancellor's jaw tightened, but he could hardly refuse a direct order from the king. He handed Marcus a small bundle of papers. These are copies of intercepted letters between Duke Roderick and his allies. Marcus took the documents and began reading. The letters were written in formal court language, discussing the drought, the refugee crisis, and the need for coordinated relief efforts. There were mentions of gathering supplies, organizing transportation, and providing security for the relief operations. But, as Marcus read more carefully, he began to see how someone could interpret certain phrases as having double meanings. One letter mentioned, gathering our strength for the trials ahead, which could refer to preparing for a harsh winter, or could be interpreted as military preparation. Another discussed, ensuring proper leadership during these difficult times, possibly about coordinating relief efforts, or possibly about questioning the king's ability to rule. But Marcus noticed something else. The handwriting was slightly off in several of the letters. Having examined countless documents in his intelligence work, he had developed an eye for detecting forgeries. These letters had been altered, or possibly created entirely. Lord Blackwood, Marcus said slowly, when did we first receive reports of Duke Roderick's supposed conspiracy? 2 weeks ago, shortly after the first refugees began arriving in the capital, Blackwood replied. And who brought us this intelligence? The Chancellor hesitated again. A trusted source within the Duke's household. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. 2 weeks ago was when King Edmund had first expressed doubts about his ability to handle the crisis. The young king had been overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster and had begun talking privately about asking his more experienced cousin for advice. Marcus had heard these conversations. He was, after all, responsible for the king's security. But, apparently, Lord Blackwood had heard them too. And perhaps the Chancellor saw Duke Roderick not as a potential helper, but as a threat to his own influence over the impressionable young king. Your Majesty, Marcus said, his decision crystallizing in his mind. I believe these documents may not be authentic. I request permission to send my own agents to verify this intelligence before taking any military action. The color drained from Blackwood's face. Captain, we don't have time for further investigation. Every day we delay gives the conspirators more time to prepare their attack. What attack? Marcus asked pointedly. If Duke Roderick were truly planning to march on the capital, where are his armies? Where are the supply trains, the siege equipment, the military preparations that such an operation would require? My scouts have seen nothing. King Edmund looked more confused than ever. Lord Blackwood, can you explain these discrepancies? Your Majesty, the Chancellor said urgently, Duke Roderick is clever. He's hiding his preparations, using the drought relief as cover for moving troops and supplies. We cannot wait for absolute proof. By then, it will be too late. Marcus saw through the deception now. Blackwood was using the king's inexperience and fear to manipulate him into making a terrible mistake. If the Royal Guard attacked the Harvest Festival, it would accomplish several things. It would eliminate Duke Roderick as a potential rival for influence over the king. It would traumatize Edmund so badly that he would become even more dependent on his advisors. and it would turn the northern nobles from potential allies into enemies of the crown. It was a brilliant political maneuver that would cost innocent lives and possibly destroy the kingdom. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of his years of loyal service. "I have served your family faithfully for over 2 decades. I have never questioned a direct order, never failed in my duty, never put my own interests above those of the crown. But I cannot, in good conscience, lead an attack on innocent people based on evidence that I believe to be fabricated." The throne room erupted. Blackwood began shouting about treason and insubordination. Several courtiers gasped and whispered among themselves. But King Edmund just stared at his captain with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you refusing a direct order?" the king asked quietly. Marcus knelt on one knee before the throne, removing his ceremonial helmet and placing it on the marble floor. "Your Majesty, I am requesting permission to investigate these allegations properly before taking action. If you order me to attack the festival without further investigation, then, yes, I must refuse that order." The silence that followed was deafening. In the kingdom's history, no member of the royal guard had ever openly defied the crown. The penalty for such defiance was death. King Edmund stood up from his throne, and, for a moment, he looked every bit the royal heir he had been raised to be. "Captain Thornfield, you are relieved of command. You will be confined to quarters while we decide how to handle your unprecedented behavior." Marcus bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Majesty." As the guards moved to escort him from the throne room, Marcus caught sight of Lord Blackwood's expression. The Chancellor was trying to look appropriately stern, but Marcus could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The removal of the one person who might have exposed his deception cleared the way for his plan to proceed. But, as Marcus was led away, he was already formulating plans of his own. His loyalty to the crown ran deeper than mere obedience to orders. Sometimes, truly serving the kingdom meant protecting it from those who claimed to speak for it. The real battle for the soul of the kingdom was just beginning. The stone walls of Marcus's quarters felt more like a prison cell than the comfortable rooms he had called home for 15 years. 2 junior guards stood outside his door. Young men he had trained himself, now forced to keep their former captain under house arrest. The irony wasn't lost on him. Through his narrow window, Marcus could see the courtyard where Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Blackstone was drilling the troops. Sarah had been his second-in-command for 8 years, a brilliant tactician and fierce warrior who had earned her rank through merit rather than noble birth. She was also the only person in the palace who might be willing to listen to his concerns about the upcoming mission. But reaching her would be nearly impossible under the current circumstances. Marcus spent his first day of confinement carefully reviewing everything he knew about the situation. The more he analyzed Lord Blackwood's evidence, the more convinced he became that it was fabricated. The timing was too convenient. The supposed conspiracy too perfectly designed to justify exactly the kind of preemptive strike that would benefit the Chancellor politically. More troubling was what Marcus knew about the actual situation in the northern provinces. The drought had been devastating, but Duke Roderick's response had been exemplary. He had opened his own granaries to feed refugees, organized work crews to dig new wells, and coordinated with other nobles to distribute resources fairly. If anything, the Duke's leadership during the crisis had only enhanced his reputation among the common people. That reputation was exactly what made him dangerous to someone like Blackwood. On his second evening of confinement, Marcus heard a soft scratching at his door. It was a sound he recognized, a signal he had taught to his most trusted agents for covert communications. Someone was trying to reach him. Moving quietly to the door, Marcus pressed his ear against the wood and listened. The guards outside were talking in low voices about their upcoming leave rotation. After a few minutes, he heard the scratching again, this time from the direction of his window. Marcus moved to the window and peered out into the darkening courtyard. A small figure in a hooded cloak stood in the shadows near the stable, barely visible in the twilight. The person held up a hand briefly, showing 5 fingers twice, the signal for a secure meeting at the 10th hour. It was Elena Vasquez, his best intelligence operative. The young woman had joined the Royal Guard spy network 3 years ago and had quickly proven herself invaluable. She was small, quick, and had an remarkable ability to blend into any crowd or setting. More importantly, she was utterly loyal to the kingdom's true interests rather than to any individual political figure. Marcus waited until exactly 10 o'clock, then began his own subtle communication. Using a small mirror to reflect moonlight, he flashed a series of brief signals toward the courtyard. After a moment, he received a response confirming that Elena had received his message. The next morning, Marcus found his breakfast tray contained more than just bread and porridge. Hidden beneath his napkin was a tiny rolled piece of parchment. The message, written in Elena's careful script, was brief but alarming. New intelligence confirms your suspicions. Blackwood's agents planted false evidence. Real correspondence shows Duke are planning legitimate relief efforts only. Festival preparations peaceful. Orders issued for attack at dawn tomorrow. Must act tonight. Trust no one else. Marcus felt his blood run cold. He had hoped that King Edmund might reconsider the attack order, or at least delay it long enough for proper investigation. But Blackwood had apparently convinced the young king to proceed immediately. Tomorrow morning, the royal guard would surround Northmere Castle and demand the surrender of Duke Roderick and his allies. When the Duke inevitably protested his innocence and refused to submit to arrest for crimes he hadn't committed, the guards would have orders to use force. Women and children attending the harvest festival would be caught in the violence. Marcus began pacing his small chamber, his mind racing through possible courses of action. His own confinement meant he couldn't directly intervene, but Elena's message suggested she was prepared to help. The question was what they could accomplish in the few hours before dawn. The most direct approach would be to warn Duke Roderick, but even if Elena could reach Northmere Castle in time, would the Duke believe her? And if he did, what then? If Roderick fled or prepared defenses, it would only seem to confirm Blackwood's accusations of guilt. No, warning the Duke alone wouldn't solve the underlying problem. They needed to expose Blackwood's deception and present King Edmund with proof that he was being manipulated into making a terrible mistake. But that proof would have to be overwhelming and undeniable, because by morning it might be too late to stop the bloodshed. As night fell, Marcus heard a commotion in the courtyard outside. Peering through his window, he saw Lieutenant Colonel Blackstone addressing a formation of royal guards. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her posture. Sarah had always been uncomfortable with missions that couldn't be clearly justified, and Marcus suspected she shared his doubts about tomorrow's operation. An hour later, as the palace settled into its nighttime quiet, Marcus heard another soft scratching at his door. This time it came from inside the wall. Elena had found her way into the secret passages that honeycombed the older sections of the palace. "Captain," came her whispered voice from somewhere behind the stone blocks. "I'm in the old servants' tunnel. Can you hear me clearly?" "Yes," Marcus whispered back, pressing his mouth close to a gap in the mortar. "What have you learned?" "I followed Blackwood's personal courier to a meeting outside the city. He's been working with a group of southern nobles who want to see Duke Roderick eliminated as a political rival. They've been funding the creation of false evidence and planning to use the aftermath of tomorrow's attack to seize more power for themselves." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling sick. The conspiracy was even worse than he had imagined. Blackwood wasn't just manipulating the king out of personal ambition. He was actively working with external enemies of the northern provinces. "There's more," Elena continued. "I managed to get into Blackwood's private chambers and found the real correspondence from Duke Roderick. The letters are completely different from the forgeries. The Duke has actually been trying to arrange a meeting with King Edmund to discuss providing aid to other kingdoms affected by the drought. He wants to position our kingdom as a leader in humanitarian relief efforts. Can you get those real letters to the king?" Marcus asked urgently. "That's the problem. Blackwood keeps them locked in a secure chest in his chambers, and he never leaves them unguarded. But I have another idea. Lieutenant Colonel Blackstone has been asking questions about tomorrow's mission. I think she suspects something is wrong." Marcus considered this. Sarah Blackstone was indeed the type of officer who would investigate orders that didn't seem right. And, as his second-in-command, she would have the authority to at least delay the mission if she had sufficient cause for concern. "Can you arrange for me to speak with her?" Marcus asked. "Too dangerous. The guards outside your door are loyal to Blackwood now. But I can get a message to her, and I might be able to arrange for her to see some evidence." "Do it. But be careful. If Blackwood realizes we're working against him, we'll all be charged with treason." Elena's voice was grim when she replied. "Captain, if that attack happens tomorrow, the real treason will be complete. Duke Roderick's death will eliminate the strongest voice for reform in the kingdom, and the northern provinces will never trust the crown again. We'll have civil war within months." After Elena left, Marcus spent the rest of the night analyzing every detail of the situation and formulating backup plans. By dawn, one way or another, he was determined to prevent a massacre of innocent people. Several hours before sunrise, he was awakened by voices in the corridor outside his chambers. Through the door, he could hear Lieutenant Colonel Blackstone speaking with the guards. "I need to speak with the captain immediately," she was saying. "I have new intelligence that affects tomorrow's mission." "Ma'am, we have strict orders not to allow anyone to see the prisoner," one of the guards replied. "Sergeant, I am the acting commander of the Royal Guard. If you prevent me from accessing information crucial to a military operation, you will be held responsible for the consequences." There was a pause. Then, the sound of keys turning in the lock. The door opened to reveal Sarah Blackstone, her usually immaculate uniform slightly disheveled, and her face tense with worry. "Captain," she said formally, "I need to discuss certain irregularities I've discovered regarding tomorrow's operation." The guards remained in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to directly disobey their new commanding officer. Sarah moved to the window and gestured for Marcus to join her, positioning them as far from the door as possible. "I've been reviewing the intelligence reports," she said quietly, "and something doesn't add up. The supposed evidence of Duke Roderick's conspiracy came from a single source, and when I tried to verify it through our other intelligence networks, I found nothing to support it." "What else?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. "I sent a discreet inquiry to Captain Morrison at the Eastern Border Post. He reports no unusual military activity in the northern provinces. No troop movements, no supply convoys, nothing that would suggest preparation for an attack on the capital." Sarah paused, glancing toward the guards at the door before continuing. "Most troubling of all, I discovered that Lord Blackwood has been in private communication with several southern nobles who have expressed interest in acquiring northern lands at reduced prices. The kind of prices that would only be available if the current northern lordships were disrupted." Marcus felt a surge of hope. Sarah had reached the same conclusions he had, and her position gave her the authority to act on them. "What do you intend to do?" he asked. "I'm going to request an immediate audience with King Edmund. I'll present my findings and recommend that the mission be postponed pending further investigation." "And if the king refuses?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then, I'll have to make a choice between following orders I believe to be based on false information or protecting innocent people from an unjustified attack." It was the same choice Marcus had faced 2 days earlier. But Sarah's situation was different. She was now the official commander of the Royal Guard, and her recommendations would carry significant weight with the king. "There's something else you should know," Marcus said. "I have an agent who has uncovered evidence that the supposed intelligence reports were fabricated. Lord Blackwood has been working with outside interests who want Duke Roderick eliminated for their own political and financial gain." Sarah's eyes widened. "Can this agent provide testimony to the king?" "If necessary, yes. But it would be better if you could get the king to delay the attack based on your own investigation. That would give us time to gather more evidence without putting my agent at risk." "I'll do my best," Sarah said. "But, Captain, you should know that Blackwood has been working to undermine your reputation since you were confined. He's been telling everyone that your refusal to follow orders proves you've been compromised, possibly even turned by northern sympathizers." Marcus nodded grimly. He had expected as much. Blackwood couldn't afford to have his deception exposed, so discrediting Marcus was essential to his plans. "Be careful, Sarah," Marcus warned. "If Blackwood realizes you're questioning his intelligence, he'll try to neutralize you too." "Let him try," Sarah replied with steel in her voice. "I've served this kingdom honorably for 12 years, and I won't let it be destroyed by political manipulation." As Sarah prepared to leave, Marcus caught her arm. "Whatever happens, remember that our first duty is to protect the innocent. The crown is important, but the kingdom is the people." Sarah nodded and left, taking the guards with her to report to Lord Blackwood about her routine consultation with the former captain. Alone again, Marcus returned to his window and watched the pre-dawn activities in the courtyard below. Royal guards were loading equipment and preparing horses for the journey to Northmere Castle. In a few hours, if nothing changed, they would be riding out to attack people who had committed no crime other than trying to help their suffering neighbors. But, as Marcus watched, he noticed something that gave him hope. Several of the senior sergeants were talking in small groups, their expressions troubled. These were experienced soldiers who had served under Marcus for years, and they They clearly shared his doubts about the mission. If Sarah's appeal to the king failed, Marcus realized there might be one last option. But it would require him to escape his confinement and take the most dangerous risk of his career. The sun was beginning to rise over the palace walls, and the fate of the kingdom would be decided within the next few hours. The sound of armored boots in the corridor told Marcus that Lieutenant Colonel Blackstone was returning from her audience with King Edmund. The rhythm of her steps, quick and irregular, suggested the meeting hadn't gone well. When Sarah entered his chamber, her face was pale and her hands were clenched into fists. The two guards who had accompanied her looked uncomfortable, avoiding Marcus's eyes. "The king has refused to postpone the mission," Sarah announced, her voice carefully controlled. Lord Blackwood convinced him that any delay would give the supposed conspirators time to escape justice. Marcus felt his heart sink, but he wasn't entirely surprised. King Edmund was young, scared, and heavily influenced by his manipulative chancellor. What was the king's reaction to your intelligence concerns? Blackwood dismissed them as insignificant details that didn't change the overall threat assessment. He claimed that Duke Roderick was clever enough to hide most of his preparations, and that the lack of obvious military activity only proved how dangerous the conspiracy really was. It was brilliant manipulation, Marcus realized. Blackwood had constructed his deception so that any evidence contradicting it could be explained away as proof of how sophisticated the supposed plot really was. "There's worse news," Sarah continued. "Blackwood has convinced the king that your confinement has been too lenient. Starting immediately, you're to be moved to the castle's maximum security cells to prevent any further contamination of Royal Guard personnel." The guards behind Sarah shifted uncomfortably. These were men Marcus had trained and led, and they clearly hated their current assignment. But orders were orders, and disobeying them meant court-martial and possible execution. "When do we leave for Northmere?" Marcus asked. "1 hour," Sarah replied. "The king wants the attack to begin at dawn, while the festival participants are still sleeping. He believes it will minimize casualties." What King Edmund didn't understand was that attacking people in their sleep, in what should have been a place of safety and celebration, would be seen as the worst kind of treachery. Even if Duke Roderick were actually guilty of conspiracy, such an attack would turn him into a martyr and unite the northern provinces against the crown. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "you're going to have to make the hardest decision of your military career." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I know. I've been thinking about it since I left the throne room. Whatever you decide, remember that good soldiers have died throughout history following orders they knew were wrong. But the soldiers who are remembered with honor are the ones who found the courage to do what was right, even when it cost them everything." One of the guards behind Sarah, Sergeant Williams, a veteran Marcus had personally promoted, spoke up unexpectedly. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" Sarah glanced at Marcus, then nodded. "Go ahead, Sergeant." "Ma'am, the men are asking questions about tomorrow's mission. A lot of the veterans served with Duke Roderick during the border wars. They respect him, and they're having trouble believing he's turned traitor." This was exactly what Marcus had hoped to hear. The Royal Guard's enlisted men weren't politicians or courtiers. They were experienced soldiers with good instincts about honor and duty. If they were questioning the mission, it meant Sarah wouldn't be alone if she decided to act. "How many men are expressing these concerns?" Sarah asked. "About half the strike force, ma'am. Maybe more." Sergeant Mitchell said he'd rather face a court-martial than attack women and children at a religious festival. Sarah exchanged another glance with Marcus. The situation was developing exactly as he had hoped it might, but it was also becoming incredibly dangerous. If too many soldiers openly refused orders, it could be considered a mutiny, which would give Blackwood an excuse to bring in mercenaries or foreign troops to maintain order. "Sergeant Williams," Marcus said, "what would you do if you discovered that you'd been ordered to attack innocent people based on false information?" The sergeant's weathered face was grim when he replied, "Captain, I've followed your orders for 8 years, and you've never led us wrong. If you say this mission is based on lies, that's good enough for me." The second guard, a younger man named Corporal Hayes, nodded in agreement. "Sir, we all heard about your refusal to follow the attack order. Word is spreading that you sacrificed your career to protect innocent people. That's the kind of leader we want to follow." Marcus felt a surge of pride in these men, but also deep concern for what their loyalty might cost them. "I appreciate your faith in me, but You both need to understand the consequences of defying orders. This isn't just about military discipline. It's about treason charges and possible execution. With respect, sir, Sergeant Williams replied. Some things are worth risking your life for. Protecting innocent people from an unjust attack is one of them. Sarah had been listening to this exchange with growing resolve. Finally, she spoke. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to do something that goes against everything you've been taught about military obedience. I need you to help me prevent a tragedy, even if it means defying direct orders from the crown. Both guards straightened to attention. What do you need us to do, ma'am? Williams asked. First, I need you to quietly spread the word among the men about what we've discovered regarding the false intelligence. Let them know that this mission is based on manufactured evidence designed to benefit Lord Blackwood's political allies. Sarah paused, then continued. Second, I need you to delay the captain's transfer to maximum security. Tell anyone who asks that you're waiting for written confirmation of the order. That will give us a few more hours to work with. And third, Corporal Hayes asked. Third, I need you to identify which officers and men we can count on if we have to take direct action to stop this attack. Marcus realized that Sarah was moving toward open rebellion against the Crown's orders. It was exactly what needed to happen, but the risks were enormous. Sarah, once you start down this path, there's no going back. Blackwood will brand you a traitor, and even if we're ultimately proven right, the king might never forgive the embarrassment. Then, so be it, Sarah replied firmly. I became a soldier to protect the kingdom and its people, not to serve the political ambitions of corrupt advisors. After the two guards left to carry out Sarah's instructions, Marcus and his former second-in-command spent precious time planning their next moves. They had perhaps 3 hours before the Royal Guard was scheduled to depart for Northmere Castle, and they needed to use that time wisely. Their first priority was gathering more evidence of Blackwood's deception. Elena Vasquez was still working to obtain the real correspondence from Duke Roderick, but they needed additional proof that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Their second priority was building support among the Royal Guard ranks. If they were going to prevent the attack, they needed enough loyal soldiers to either refuse orders en masse or actively interfere with the mission. Most importantly, they needed to find a way to present their evidence to King Edmund in a manner that couldn't be suppressed or discredited by Lord Blackwood. The young king was the key to everything. If they could show him the truth about the manipulation he had been subjected to, he might still be able to prevent the catastrophe. An hour later, Elena appeared at Marcus's window with crucial news. Captain, I managed to photograph several pages from Blackwood's private correspondence. The evidence is overwhelming. He's been coordinating with southern nobles who want to acquire northern lands, and they've been paying him to eliminate Duke Roderick as a political obstacle. Can you get that evidence to the king? Marcus asked. Not directly. Blackwood has restricted access to the throne room, and he's posted his own loyal guards around the king's private quarters. But I might be able to reach Queen Mother Isabella. She has the right to request an immediate audience with her son, and Blackwood can't refuse her without raising suspicions. Queen Mother Isabella was King Edmund's mother and the widow of the previous king. She had withdrawn from active politics after her husband's death, but she still commanded enormous respect and had significant influence over her son. More importantly, she was known for her intelligence and her commitment to justice. Do it, Marcus said. But be prepared for Blackwood to try to discredit whatever evidence you present. He'll claim the documents are forgeries or that you're part of the conspiracy yourself. I've thought of that, Elena replied. I also managed to identify the courier who's been carrying messages between Blackwood and the southern nobles. If we can capture him and get him to testify about what he's been doing, that would be testimony that even Blackwood couldn't dismiss. As Elena departed to contact the Queen Mother, Marcus heard the sound of horses and armor in the courtyard outside. The Royal Guard strike force was beginning to assemble for the journey to Northmere Castle. Through his window, he could see Lieutenant Colonel Blackstone addressing the formation, her face carefully neutral as she gave orders she clearly didn't believe in. But Marcus also noticed something else. Several groups of soldiers were talking quietly among themselves, and their body language suggested they were discussing more than just routine preparations. Sergeant Williams and Corporal Hayes had apparently been successful in spreading word about the questionable intelligence behind their mission. 30 minutes later, Sarah returned to Marcus's chamber with a mixture of hope and concern on her face. I've identified 43 men who are willing to openly refuse the attack order if we can provide them with proof that it's unjustified. That's enough to effectively cancel the mission, but it's also enough to constitute a mutiny under military law. And the officers? Marcus asked. More complicated. Captain Morrison from the Eastern Garrison arrived this morning, and he's skeptical about the intelligence, but he won't openly defy orders without overwhelming evidence. Major Thompson is completely loyal to Blackwood. Captain Rodriguez is asking questions, but hasn't committed to any position yet. Marcus calculated quickly. With 43 enlisted men, and at least one captain expressing doubts, they had enough support to stop the immediate attack. But without solid evidence to justify their actions, they would all be facing treason charges within hours. Everything depended on Elena's success in reaching the Queen Mother and presenting their evidence before the strike force departed. As if summoned by his thoughts, Elena appeared again at his window. Captain, Queen Mother Isabella has agreed to see the evidence immediately. She's calling for an emergency session with King Edmund and his senior advisors. We have perhaps 1 hour to present our case before the attack force leaves. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but also deep anxiety. This would be their only chance to expose Blackwood's deception and prevent a massacre. If they failed, not only would innocent people die at Northmere Castle, but everyone involved in the attempt to stop the attack would face execution for treason. Elena, Marcus said urgently, make sure the Queen Mother understands that time is critical. Every minute of delay gives Blackwood more opportunity to prepare counterarguments or even cancel the emergency session entirely. Understood, Captain. And sir? Lieutenant Colonel Blackstone asked me to tell you that regardless of what happens in the throne room, she's prepared to refuse the attack order. She said she'd rather face a court-martial than participate in what she now believes is a war crime. As Elena disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus realized that the next hour would determine not just the fate of Duke Roderick and the people at the Harvest Festival, but the future of the entire kingdom. The choices made in the throne room would either preserve the honor and integrity of the crown or begin a civil war that could tear the kingdom apart. Through his window, Marcus could see the Royal Guard strike force completing their final preparations. In 60 minutes, they would either be standing down from an unjust mission or riding out to commit an act that would haunt the kingdom for generations. The battle for truth and justice was about to reach its climax.